Camping had always been my escape. The fresh air, the quiet hum of the forest, the way the world just seemed to slow down, it was something I looked forward to every chance I got. My older brother, Cameron, was the same way. We had been doing trips like this for years, always pushing ourselves to go deeper, farther, away from crowded campsites and well-worn trails. This time, Cameron had found a spot in the Appalachian wilderness. Secluded, remote, untouched. At least, that's what we thought. We arrived just before sunset, following a narrow, overgrown trail that barely looked like a path at all. Trees pressed in on either side, their branches stretching overhead, blocking out most of the sky. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. After about an hour of hiking, we finally reached a small clearing. It was perfect, flat ground, surrounded by thick trees, and most importantly, completely isolated. We dropped our packs and started setting up the tent, but as we moved around, I noticed something strange. Scattered throughout the clearing were objects. At first, they didn't seem like much. A single boot lying half buried in the dirt. A trekking pole snapped clean in half. A rusted knife left abandoned near the tree line. I frowned and nudged the boot with my foot. "Dude, this is weird," I muttered. Cameron barely looked up as he pulled the tent out of his pack. "Probably just old gear. People forget stuff all the time." But that didn't make sense. No experienced camper leaves gear behind like this. And even if they did, it wouldn't be so random. One boot, but no second? A broken trekking pole, but no backpack? The knife unsettled me the most. It wasn't buried under leaves or dirt like it had been lost for years. It was just lying there, almost like someone had placed it there. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. I was overthinking it. We set up camp, got a fire going, and started cooking dinner. The sun dipped below the horizon, and as darkness settled over the woods, I finally let myself relax. Then, just as I was starting to push the unease away, I saw it. A flicker of orange. A small, distant fire. And it wasn't ours. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The fire was small, barely visible through the thick trees, but it was there flickering deep in the woods. I sat up straighter, staring at it. "Cameron, tell me you see that." He turned, squinting in the same direction. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, in a quieter voice than usual, he muttered, "That wasn't there before." I exhaled slowly, my stomach tightening. He was right. We had been here for hours, and the only source of light had been our own fire. We hadn't seen another soul since arriving. So where the hell had that fire come from? Maybe someone hiked in late, Cameron suggested, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. From where? I countered. We didn't pass any other campsites. No cars at the trailhead. No trails leading out in that direction. Cameron didn't have an answer for that. We both just stared at the distant flame, waiting for anything to happen. A shadow passing in front of it. The flicker of movement. The distant murmur of voices. But there was nothing. The fire just burned, flickering softly in the breeze. No one tended to it. No figures moved around it. It was just sitting there. The unease from earlier, the scattered gear, the silence came rushing back, stronger than before. "This doesn't feel right," I admitted. Cameron exhaled, rubbing his face. "It's just some guy camping. We're acting paranoid." But the thing was, campers don't act like that. They move around their sites, tending to the fire, cooking food, talking. You hear them. But whoever was out there was dead silent. I tried to ignore it. We forced ourselves to go back to eating, pretending like we weren't still thinking about that distant fire. But the mood had changed. We weren't joking around like we usually did. The woods felt heavier, like they were pressing in on us. By the time we finished eating, the fire was still burning. Still unmoving. "All right," Cameron said, stretching. "Let's call it a night." I hesitated. The last thing I wanted to do was close my eyes while that thing, whatever it was still out there. "What if it gets closer?" I asked. Cameron sighed. "If it does, we'll hear it. Just get some sleep." I didn't feel good about it, but what else could we do? We weren't about to pack up and hike back in the dark, and there was no real reason to leave. It was just a weird, distant fire. So I crawled into my tent, zipping it shut, listening to Cameron as he put out our own fire. Then darkness. I lay there, staring at the tent ceiling, listening. Nothing. No wind. No insects. No distant rustling of animals in the brush. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels full. Like something is waiting. I closed my eyes, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. And then, as I finally drifted off to sleep, I heard it. A footstep. Not from our campsite. From the woods. Near the fire. And then another, and another. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. Then they stopped, and the night returned to silence. I held my breath, every muscle in my body frozen. Had I imagined it? I turned over, trying to shake the feeling away, telling myself it was just some distant animal. But deep down I knew. Someone or something was out there. And they weren't moving. They were watching. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the ceiling of my tent, waiting for another sound. My heart was hammering in my chest, every muscle locked in place, straining to hear something, anything. But there was only silence, the kind of silence that feels full, like something is out there, just beyond your vision, just beyond your hearing, waiting. I turned onto my side, squeezing my eyes shut, trying to force my body to relax. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the distant fire had put me on edge, and my brain was making me paranoid. Maybe, somewhere between fear and exhaustion, I finally drifted off. And then I woke up. Suddenly, no noise had startled me, no movement, just a deep, unsettling awareness that something was wrong. I turned, glancing at my phone. 3:12 a.m. The air inside the tent was cold. I listened, barely breathing, but the forest was still deathly quiet. Not even the sound of wind moving through the trees. I shifted slightly, my sleeping bag rustling beneath me, and then I saw it. Through the thin mesh window of my tent, beyond the trees, the distant fire was still burning. But now, standing between us and that flickering light, were shadows, figures. I froze. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the longer I stared, the clearer they became. Tall, unmoving silhouettes scattered among the trees, just standing there, watching. Too many, at least 10, maybe more. Every hair on my body stood on end. My breathing became shallow, ragged. I squeezed my hands into fists to stop them from shaking. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just some other camper sitting by their fire. These figures, they weren't moving. They weren't doing anything. They were just there. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe through my nose. You're imagining this. You're half asleep. It's just shadows from the fire. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying to myself, because my eyes had adjusted now. And these weren't tricks of the light. These were people, and they were facing us. My fingers fumbled for my flashlight, but I stopped myself. I didn't want them to know I was awake. I needed to wake Cameron. Now, moving as slowly as I could, I reached toward his tent and tapped the fabric. "Cameron," I whispered. "Wake up." Nothing. I tried again, slightly harder. "Dude, wake up." A groggy mumble, then movement, the sound of him shifting inside his sleeping bag. "What?" His voice was thick with sleep. "Shut up," I hissed. "Look." I heard the zipper of his tent slide down. A moment later, he peeked his head out, and then he saw them. I didn't even have to ask. I felt it in the way his breathing changed, the way he froze completely. For several long, agonizing seconds, we just stared. Then, finally, in a voice so low I almost didn't hear it, Cameron whispered, "Holy **T. His voice was different, tight, like he was trying not to panic. And that scared me more than anything. Cameron never panicked. He was the guy who stayed cool during storms, who didn't flinch at weird noises in the woods. But now he sounded as terrified as I felt. Slowly, I turned my head back toward the trees. The figures were still there, still watching, still waiting, and then one of them took a step forward. The figure moved, just a single step forward. Slow, deliberate. A chill raced down my spine. Cameron and I didn't breathe. We didn't speak. We just watched. Then another one stepped forward. And another. It wasn't fast. It wasn't aggressive. But it was intentional. The worst part? There was no sound. No crunch of leaves. No snap of twigs. Nothing. It was impossible. People that size moving through the underbrush should have made noise. But they didn't. Cameron's hand clamped down on my wrist. "We need to go." His voice was barely above a breath. I nodded, trying to swallow the rising panic. We moved slowly, inching backward toward the tent zipper. Any sudden movement felt like a mistake. And then, that sound. A low, guttural hum, deep and unnatural, vibrating through the trees. Not a growl, not a voice, something else. I stiffened, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Cameron do the same. Then the fire in the distance went out, snuffed out in an instant. We weren't waiting anymore. Run. Cameron yanked the tent open, and we bolted. Branches whipped against my face. My lungs burned. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Behind us, footsteps, but they weren't running. They were walking, slow, rhythmic, following us, like they knew exactly where we were going. I risked one glance over my shoulder, and I saw them. Their faces were smooth, featureless. No eyes, no mouth, just blank, pale skin stretched where their faces should have been. I almost tripped. My stomach twisted in pure terror. "Don't look back," Cameron shouted. I forced my eyes forward, focusing only on the path ahead. The car. That was the only thing that mattered now. The only way we were getting out of here alive. The car was still over 100 yards away, but it felt like a mile. My legs ached. My lungs burned, but I didn't dare slow down. Cameron was just ahead of me, moving fast, his breaths ragged. Behind us, the footsteps never changed pace. Still walking, still following, never running, never panicked, like they had all the time in the world. I didn't dare look back again. I knew what I'd see, those pale, blank faces, but I could feel them, feel their presence pressing against my back. We burst out of the tree line, our car finally in sight. I dug into my pocket for the keys, fingers trembling so hard I could barely grip them. Then I heard a thump. I turned. Cameron had tripped. I barely had time to react before he scrambled to his feet. His face twisted in pure terror. He spun toward me, eyes wide. There, closer. I didn't think. I just ripped open the driver's door. "Go! Go!" I screamed. Cameron yanked the passenger door open, diving inside just as I jammed the keys into the ignition. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn them. The engine sputtered for a second too long, and then the headlights came on. I gasped, my chest locked up, because now, standing just beyond the beam of light, were all of them, lined up, still, unmoving. They had stopped walking, they had stopped chasing, and they were just waiting, their smooth, featureless faces turned toward us. They weren't trying to stop us. They had never needed to run. I slammed the car into reverse. The tires spun against the dirt before finally catching, launching us backward. Cameron was hyperventilating beside me, his eyes still locked on them. "Don't stop," he choked out. I didn't. I floored it. We tore down the dark road, tree branches whipping past on either side. I didn't care about the bumps, the potholes, nothing. I just needed to get as far away as possible. Only when we were miles away, back on the main road, did I finally let out a shaking breath. Cameron was pale. His hands were gripping his knees. He wouldn't look at me. I swallowed hard. "Did you see their faces?" I whispered. He closed his eyes, nodded, and then, barely above a breath, "They didn't have any." We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. Not until we were back in town, back in the glow of streetlights, back where the world felt normal. Even then, something was wrong. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like we had escaped. Cameron parked in front of my apartment, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, exhaling shakily. "Nothing. We forget it. We don't go back." I wanted to believe that was enough. That if we just pretended it didn't happen, it wouldn't matter. But the next day, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled up Google Earth trying to retrace our route. Nothing. The road we had driven down didn't exist. The clearing where we had camped? Not on the map. I zoomed in, checked different angles, scoured the entire section of the forest. There was nothing. It was like the entire place had been erased. Or worse, like it had never existed at all. I texted Cameron a screenshot. "Dude, where were we?" A few minutes later, he responded. Don't look for it. Just let it go. I tried. I really did. But 3 nights later, I woke up to a notification on my phone. A message from an unknown number. No words. Just a single photo. A picture of our tent. Taken from the outside.